She stood at the servants' entrance with trembling hands, clutching an invitation she knew was poison wrapped in gilt paper. Miss Elara Ashmont, penniless, orphaned, employed to teach the children of those who would never acknowledge her at their own table, had been summoned to the Duke of Thornwood's annual banquet. Not as a guest, as a jest. Lady Pemberton's laughter still rang in her ears from that afternoon. "Do come, Miss Ashmont. We are ever so curious to see what a governess wears to a ducal ball. Perhaps you might borrow something from the scullery maids?" The other ladies had tittered behind their fans, their eyes glittering with malice. And Elara, standing in the doorway of the nursery with chalk dust on her sleeve and her mother's worn locket hidden beneath her collar, had done the unforgivable. She had curtsied. She had smiled. And she had said, "I shall be delighted to attend, Lady Pemberton. Thank you for your gracious invitation." Wait, before the next confession unfolds, if this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. Now, at 7:30 on a November evening cold enough to freeze the Thames, Elara stood before the servant's door, knowing she was walking into her own humiliation. She had no illusions. This invitation was an entertainment designed to remind her and everyone else of exactly where she belonged in the rigid architecture of society. Below. Invisible. Useful only when teaching Latin verbs to bored children or serving as a warning tale to young ladies who might consider marrying beneath their station. The door opened before she could knock.
"Miss Ashmont?" The footman's face was carefully neutral, but his eyes traveled over her simple gray wool dress, her threadbare cloak, her worn boots. "You're to enter through the main entrance, miss. Those were His Grace's specific instructions." Ilara's heart stuttered. "I beg your pardon?" "The main entrance, miss, if you'll follow the path around to the front." It was worse than she'd imagined. They weren't content to let her slip in quietly through the back. They wanted her to walk through the front doors like a guest, so that every arriving noble could witness the governess in her poverty, pretending to belong. She should leave. She should turn and walk back to her tiny room above the kitchen in the Pemberton townhouse, resign her position in the morning, and take the mail coach to... where? She had no family, no prospects, no references if she abandoned her post. Pride was a luxury she could not afford. Elara lifted her chin and walked around to the front of Thornwood House. The torchlit entrance blazed like a stage. 3 carriages were already disgorging their glittering passengers, ladies in silk and jewels, gentlemen in impeccable evening dress. Elara climbed the marble steps, her boots clicking against stone, and a silence fell like snowfall across the assembled crowd. Lady Pemberton stood near the entrance, magnificent in sapphire silk. Her smile was a knife. "Miss Ashmont, how brave of you to come, and so modestly dressed. How refreshing." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Elara felt it like a physical blow, but she had survived worse. She had survived her father's death, her mother's consumption, the workhouse, the years of scraping and studying and clawing her way into genteel poverty. She could survive this. "Your invitation was most kind, Lady Pemberton," Elara said quietly. "Oh, but we haven't seen your carriage, dear girl. Did you walk?" More laughter. How industrious. "My carriage was delayed," Elara heard herself say. A lie.
A stupid, obvious lie that made the humiliation worse. "Of course it was," Lady Pemberton purred. "Well, do come in. The Duke is so very eager to meet you." Elara stepped into the entrance hall, and the weight of 100 eyes pressed against her skin. The orchestra was playing in the ballroom beyond. Candlelight glittered off crystal chandeliers. Everything smelled of hothouse roses and expensive perfume, and she smelled of lavender soap and chalk dust. She wanted to disappear into the floor. "Miss Elara Ashmont," the butler announced, his voice echoing through the hall. And then Impossibly, a voice cut through the whispers. "Ah, there you are. I've been waiting." The crowd parted, and Alara found herself staring at the Duke of Thornwood himself. She had never seen him before. He was abroad during the season, and his London residence was closed more often than not. But everyone knew of him. Alexander Grayson, 7th Duke of Thornwood, 32 years old, unmarried, wealthy beyond imagination, and notoriously reclusive. Dark hair, storm gray eyes, a face too hard to be handsome, too compelling to look away from. He was walking toward her. Ilara's mind went blank. "Your Grace," she managed, dropping into a curtsy so deep her knee touched the floor. He took her hand and raised her. His grip was warm, solid, real. "Forgive me for not meeting you at the door, Miss Ashmont. I was detained." His voice was low, measured, and entirely courteous, as if she were an expected guest, as if she belonged here. The silence in the entrance hall was absolute. Your Grace, You must be exhausted from your journey," the Duke continued smoothly. "Come, let me introduce you properly." He offered his arm. Ilara stared at it as if it were a serpent. This was part of the game. It had to be. He was going to escort her into the ballroom, parade her in front of the entire nobility, and then reveal the joke. But what choice did she have? She placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the fine wool beneath her fingers, and let him lead her into the lion's den. The ballroom was a cathedral of light. Hundreds of candles burned in chandeliers overhead. The orchestra played a waltz. Ladies in gowns worth more than Ilara would earn in 10 years swept across the polished floor in the arms of gentlemen who would never acknowledge her existence. The Duke led her to the center of the room. "My lords, my ladies," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the music. "I am pleased to introduce Miss Ilara Ashmont, lately of Ashmont Hall in Derbyshire, and my honored guest this evening." The music stopped. Ashmont Hall, her father's estate, lost to creditors 7 years ago. No one here should remember it. No one should remember her. "Your Grace," someone ventured, "surely you mean Miss Ashmont, the governess?" "I mean Miss Ashmont," the Duke said, steel beneath the courtesy, "whose father, Colonel Richard Ashmont, saved my life at Waterloo." He turned to Ilara, and his eyes held something she couldn't name. "I owe your father a debt I can never repay, Miss Ashmont. The least I can do is ensure his daughter is received with the honor she deserves." Ilara couldn't breathe. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. Her father had died at Waterloo, yes, but he was a foot soldier, not a colonel. He had no connection to dukes. This was an elaborate cruelty, a setup for an even greater humiliation. But the Duke was still speaking. "I have been trying to locate you for some time, Miss Ashmont. I'm only sorry it took me so long." He paused. "You've been working as a governess." It wasn't a question. "Yes, Your Grace," Ilara whispered. Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, perhaps, but not at her. "That ends tonight," he said. "You are under my protection now, and anyone who offers you disrespect offers it to me." He turned to face the assembled nobility, and Ilara saw several people, including Lady Pemberton, go pale. "Now," the Duke said, turning back to Ilara with something that might have been a smile, "would you do me the honor of this dance?" Ilara's world tilted. She didn't know how to dance, not the formal ballroom dances of the nobility. She'd watched from doorways, yes, but she'd never been taught. She would humiliate herself. She would humiliate him. "Your Grace, I cannot." "You can," he said quietly. "Trust me." And perhaps it was the kindness in his voice, or the fact that she had already lost everything and had nothing left to lose. But Ilara placed her hand in his and let him lead her onto the floor. The orchestra began to play. The Duke's hand settled at her waist, and he pulled her into the opening steps of the waltz. "Follow my lead," he murmured. "I won't let you fall." She stumbled. He steadied her. She stepped on his foot. He didn't flinch. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered as they turned. "Because I owe your father my life," he said. "Because you deserve better than to be mocked by people who aren't fit to empty your inkwell. And because—" he paused. "Because I've been searching for you for 3 years, and I'll be damned if I let you disappear again. You don't know me. I know enough." His eyes met hers. "I know you've survived. I know you've kept your dignity in circumstances that would break most people. I know you walked into this house tonight knowing you would be humiliated, and you came anyway because you're brave enough to face your enemies without flinching." Alara's throat tightened. "I'm not brave. I'm desperate." Desperation and bravery often wear the same face. The music swelled around them, and Alara realized with a shock that she was dancing. Truly dancing. The Duke was leading her through the steps with such skill that she couldn't help but follow, and the ballroom was spinning around them in a blur of candlelight and silk. "This is a mistake," she said, "when they discover the truth." "What truth?" "That my father was a common soldier, that I have no fortune, no family, no claim to your protection, that I am exactly what they say, a penniless orphan who doesn't belong here." The Duke's hand tightened at her waist. "Your father was a sergeant who threw himself in front of a French bayonet meant for a foolish young lieutenant who'd gotten separated from his regiment. That lieutenant was me. Your father died saving my life, Miss Ashmont. I spent 3 years trying to find his family so I could honor the debt. Do you think I care what anyone in this ballroom thinks about where you belong?" Ilara's vision blurred. "He never told us. He never said. He probably didn't remember my name. I was nobody then, just another officer in the chaos." The Duke's voice softened. "But I remembered him. And when I finally found the records and learned he had a daughter, I searched for you. You'd already been forced to sell Ashmont Hall. You'd disappeared into the world of governesses and companions, moving from house to house. It took me months to track you to the Pembertons." "You knew I was there?" "I sent the invitation," he said, "through Lady Pemberton so you wouldn't suspect. I thought if I could get you here, I could make things right. I didn't realize," his jaw tightened, "I didn't realize she would use it as an opportunity to torment you. That is my fault, and I apologize." The music was ending. Ilara could feel the eyes of the entire ballroom on them, hungry for scandal, waiting for the next act of this impossible play. "What happens now?" she whispered. The Duke led her through the final turn and bowed. "Now," he said, "you meet the rest of society as my honored guest, and tomorrow we discuss how to restore what was taken from you." "Your Grace, I don't want charity." "It isn't charity. It's a debt." His eyes held hers. "Your father gave me my life, Miss Ashmont. Let me give you back yours." The rest of the evening passed in a haze of unreality. The Duke didn't leave her side. He introduced her to viscounts and baronesses, to MPs and Meyer royalty, and every single one of them treated her with cautious respect because the Duke of Thornwood had declared her under his protection. Lady Pemberton tried to approach once, her face tight with fury, but the Duke intercepted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Lady Pemberton, I believe you've been employing Miss Ashmont as a governess." Yes, Your Grace." "How fortunate for your children, though I'm afraid Miss Ashmont will be unable to continue in that capacity. I'm sure you understand." It wasn't a question. Lady Pemberton's face went white, then red. "Of course, Your Grace, though I must say I had no idea of Miss Ashmont's connections." "Didn't you?" The Duke's voice was ice wrapped in silk. "How strange. I would have thought anyone with basic courtesy would treat a woman of gentle birth with respect, regardless of her circumstances, but perhaps I'm old-fashioned." He turned away, dismissing her, and Alara felt a savage satisfaction she immediately felt guilty for. "You've made an enemy," she murmured to the Duke. "I've made many enemies, Miss Ashmont. One more won't trouble me." By midnight, Alara's feet ached and her head spun. She had danced twice more. Once with a kind elderly marquis who told her stories about her father's regiment, and once with a young baron who spent the entire dance talking about his horses. She had drunk champagne that tasted like starlight. She had eaten delicacies from a buffet table that groaned with excess.
and through it all she had felt the Duke's presence like a shield at her back. When the clock struck 1, he appeared at her side. "You're exhausted. Let me have a carriage brought around." "I can walk." "You will not walk." His tone brooked no argument. "You are my guest, and you will be delivered home safely."
"Where are you staying?" Ilara hesitated. "The Pemberton townhouse, in the servants' quarters." The muscle in his jaw twitched. "Not anymore. You'll have your things sent to Thornwood House. You'll stay there until we make more permanent arrangements." "Your Grace, I cannot possibly." "You can, and you will." He softened slightly. "Please, Miss Ashmont, your father saved my life. Let me do this much for his daughter." What could she say? She had no home, no position, no prospects. Pride was a luxury, and kindness, even kindness wrapped in obligation, was too rare to refuse. "Thank you," she whispered. 30 minutes later, Ilara found herself sitting in the Duke's own carriage, wrapped in a fur blanket that probably cost more than she'd earned in 5 years. A maid had been sent to the Pembertons to collect her things, all of which fit into a single trunk. The carriage rolled through London's midnight streets, and Ilara stared out at the gaslit darkness, trying to comprehend what had just happened. This morning, she had been invisible, a governess, a cautionary tale. Tonight, she had waltzed with a duke. Tomorrow, she would wake in Thornwood House as his honored guest. It was too much, too strange, too generous. Men didn't do things like this without expecting something in return. The thought made her cold despite the fur blanket. The Duke had been nothing but courteous, nothing but kind, but he was still a man, and she was still alone in the world with no one to protect her. What does he want from me? The carriage pulled up to Thornwood House, not the grand ballroom entrance, but a smaller side door. The Duke himself was waiting, having ridden ahead on horseback. He handed her down from the carriage with the same courtesy he'd shown all evening. "Mrs. Hartwell will show you to your rooms," he said, gesturing to a kindly-looking woman in her 50s. "If you need anything, ring for a maid."
Breakfast is at 9, but you may sleep as late as you wish. "Your Grace," Ilara said, and her voice shook slightly. "Why are you really doing this?" In the lamplight, his face was shadowed, unreadable. "Because your father saved my life," he said. "Because you deserve better than what the world has given you. And because—" He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his features. "Because when I searched for you and finally found you, working yourself to exhaustion, teaching spoiled children, and eating meals in the servants' hall, I was ashamed. Ashamed that it took me so long. Ashamed that you've been suffering while I lived in comfort. This is my chance to make that right." He bowed, formally, as if she were a duchess. "Sleep well, Miss Ashmont. Tomorrow we begin again." He walked away into the darkness, leaving Ilara standing in the doorway with Mrs. Hartwell, her heart a tangle of confusion and hope and fear. "Come along, dear," Mrs. Hartwell said gently. "Let's get you settled." The room she was given was larger than any she'd ever slept in, even as a child at Ashmont Hall. A 4-poster bed with velvet curtains, a fireplace already burning, a dressing table with a mirror, windows overlooking the garden. Ilara sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her shabby gray dress, and began to laugh, or cry. She wasn't sure which. This morning, she had been nothing. Tonight, she was a Duke's honored guest. Tomorrow, who knew what she would become? She fell asleep still wearing her dress, too exhausted to change, and dreamed of her father's face, smiling, proud, telling her she was brave. Part 2. Ilara woke to sunlight streaming through windows dressed in silk curtains the color of cream. For one disorienting moment, she thought she was still dreaming. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back, the banquet, the humiliation, the Duke's impossible rescue, and she sat up so quickly her head spun.
Someone had undressed her while she slept. She was wearing a fine lawn nightgown that wasn't hers, and her shabby gray dress had been folded neatly over a chair. Her single trunk sat at the foot of the bed, looking small and pathetic in the grandeur of the room. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Ashmont, are you awake?" A young maid's voice, cheerful and respectful. "Yes, come in." The maid entered with a tea tray, followed by another carrying a pitcher of hot water. "Good morning, miss. I'm Annie, and this is Beth. Mrs. Hartwell sent us to help you dress. His Grace said you're to join him for breakfast at 10 if you're feeling well enough." Alara glanced at the clock on the mantel. 9:30. Yes, thank you." The maids moved with efficient kindness, pouring water into the basin, laying out towels, opening her trunk, and stopping. "Miss," Annie said carefully, "His Grace mentioned you might need some things. There's a dressmaker coming this afternoon, but in the meantime, Mrs. Hartwell thought you might wear this." She produced a morning dress in soft dove gray, far finer than anything Alara owned, but still modest enough to be appropriate for a woman in uncertain circumstances. Someone, the Duke presumably, had thought of everything. Alara's pride warred with necessity. She had nothing suitable to wear to breakfast with a Duke, nothing suitable to wear anywhere in this house. "Thank you," she said quietly, and let them help her. 30 minutes later, dressed and groomed, Alara followed a footman down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced Graysons to a breakfast room that overlooked the garden. The Duke was already there, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. He rose when she entered. "Miss Ashmont, I trust you slept well?" "Yes, Your Grace, thank you." She hesitated, "though I believe someone undressed me." "Mrs. Hartwell, I hope that wasn't too presumptuous, but you were so exhausted I didn't want to wake you."
He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, sit. Help yourself to whatever you like." The sideboard groaned with breakfast dishes: eggs, bacon, toast, kippers, porridge, fruit, pastries. Enough food to feed a family for a week. Alara took a slice of toast and some tea, her appetite strangled by nerves. The Duke watched her with those storm-gray eyes. "You don't have to be afraid of me." "I'm not afraid." It was half a lie. "Then you're wary, which is sensible." He set down his newspaper. "Miss Ashmont, let me be direct. I have no improper intentions toward you. You are under my protection as my guest and my ward, in the moral sense, not the legal one, unless you wish otherwise. My household has been instructed to treat you with the utmost respect. If anyone fails to do so, you will tell me immediately." Alara stared at her toast. "Why do you care so much? My father saved your life, yes, but that was years ago. You don't owe me this." "I owe your father everything. You are his daughter. Therefore you'll ruin your reputation by housing an unmarried woman in your bachelor household? You'll make enemies of people like Lady Pemberton? You'll spend a fortune on dressmakers and carriages for a woman you don't even know?" Alara looked up, meeting his eyes. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but this doesn't make sense. There must be something you want from me." The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You're right. There is something I want." Alara's heart sank. There it was, the truth beneath the kindness. "I want," the Duke continued quietly, "to stop feeling like a man who took 3 years to honor a debt, while the daughter of his savior worked herself to exhaustion for people who treated her like dirt. I want to sleep at night without seeing your father's face when the bayonet struck him. I want to feel like I've done something decent in a world that rewards indecency." He paused. "And yes, I want something else."
"I want to see what kind of woman emerges when you're given the freedom to be more than a governess. Call it curiosity, call it penance, but that's the truth." Alara didn't know what to say. "I'm not a good man, Miss Ashmont," the Duke said. "I'm a selfish man who happens to occasionally do the right thing when it's convenient. But in this case, doing the right thing happens to align with my interests. So let me help you. Let me clear my conscience. And in return, you get your life back. It's a fair trade. And if I refuse, then I'll give you a generous settlement and arrange a position somewhere respectable where you'll be treated well. You're not a prisoner here." Alara looked down at her hands. They were rough from work, the nails uneven. A governess's hands. "I don't know how to be anything else." "Then learn." The Duke's voice was gentler now. "You have time. You have resources. You have me, for what that's worth. And you have more courage than half the people in that ballroom last night. They'll think I'm your mistress. Let them think what they want. Anyone who knows me knows I don't keep mistresses under my own roof." He smiled slightly. "I'm boringly respectable in that regard." Despite everything, Alara felt her lips twitch. Boringly respectable dukes don't usually house penniless governesses. Then perhaps I'm not as boring as I thought. He poured her more tea. Eat something, Miss Ashmont. You're thin as a rail, and after breakfast, we need to discuss your future. Elara ate, though the food tasted like ashes. Not because it wasn't good, it was exquisite, but because she couldn't shake the feeling that this was all temporary, that she would wake up back in the Pemberton servants' quarters, and this would all have been a fever dream. After breakfast, the Duke led her to his study, a wood-paneled room lined with books and smelling of leather and tobacco. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair by the fireplace. He took the one opposite, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking about how best to restore your position. Your father's estate was sold to pay his debts, correct?" "Yes. After he died, we discovered he'd borrowed against it. When Mama died 2 years later, there was nothing left." "And you had no other family?" "A cousin in Scotland who refused to acknowledge us. We were quite thoroughly alone." The Duke's expression darkened. "I see. Well, here's what I propose. I will establish a trust in your name, with an annual income sufficient for you to live independently as a gentlewoman. Not extravagantly, but comfortably. Enough to rent a modest house, keep a small staff, move in respectable circles." Ilara's breath caught. "Your Grace, that's—" "Additionally," he continued, "I will sponsor your re-entry into society. You'll need a wardrobe, a chaperone, invitations to the right events. I have an aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Blackmore, who's eccentric but well-connected. She'll help." "Why would she help me?" "Because I'll ask her to, and because she's been telling me for years I need to do something useful with my wealth instead of brooding in my country estate." He smiled slightly. "She'll be delighted to have a project." Ilara's mind reeled. "You're talking about making me respectable again, eligible." "I'm talking about giving you choices. What you do with them is up to you." "People will talk. They'll say I'm your—" "They'll say many things. Let them. Within 6 months, you'll be established enough that it won't matter." The Duke leaned back. "Unless you'd prefer a different arrangement, I could find you a position as a paid companion to a respectable widow, or help you emigrate if you want to start fresh somewhere else. This is your decision, Miss Ashmont." Ilara stared at the fire, her thoughts spinning. Independence, respectability, a future beyond teaching other people's children and living in servants' quarters. It was too much to comprehend.
"Why not just give me money and send me away?" she asked. "It would be simpler." "Because you deserve more than simplicity. You deserve justice." The Duke's voice was firm. "Your father was a hero who died with no honors, no pension, no recognition. You were forced into genteel poverty through no fault of your own. I can't bring him back. I can't undo the past. But I can give you a future worthy of his sacrifice. And if I fail, if I embarrass you in society, you won't." He said it with such certainty that Ilara almost believed him. "You survived the Pembertons. You survived last night. You can survive anything society throws at you." Ilara closed her eyes. She thought of her mother, dying in a drafty room because they couldn't afford a doctor. She thought of the workhouse, the years of clawing her way into respectability through sheer stubborn pride. She thought of Lady Pemberton's laughter. She thought of her father, who had thrown himself in front of a bayonet for a stranger. "All right," she whispered. "I'll try." The Duke's smile was quick and genuine. "Good. Now, the dressmaker will be here at 2. My aunt will arrive tomorrow. And tonight, we're having dinner with some carefully selected guests who won't gossip excessively. Consider it practice." "You've already planned all this?" "I've had 3 years to plan," he said simply. "I just needed to find you first." The dressmaker, Madame Rousseau, arrived with 3 assistants and enough fabric to clothe a regiment. She swept into the morning room where Ilara waited and examined her with the critical eye of a general surveying troops. Good bones, terrible posture. Years of hunching over books, yes? We fix. And the color. No more gray, no more brown. You are not a governess now." She gestured imperiously. "Strip." Ilara glanced at the footman standing guard. "Out," Madame Rousseau snapped at him. "This is not a show." For the next 3 hours, Ilara was measured, draped, penned, and scolded in a mixture of French and English. Madame Rousseau declared she needed everything: morning dresses, afternoon dresses,
evening gowns, walking costumes, riding habits, undergarments, nightgowns, cloaks, gloves, bonnets, shoes. His Grace said spare no expense, Madame Rousseau said, pins in her mouth. So we do not spare. You will be magnificent. I don't need to be magnificent, Alara protested. I just need to be respectable. Bah! Respectable is boring. You will be elegant, refined. You will make those cows who mocked you weep with jealousy. She stepped back, examining a pale blue silk against Alara's skin. Yes, this one. It makes your eyes like the sky before a storm. Despite herself, Alara looked in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, a woman with good bones and storm sky eyes, draped in silk the color of hope. I don't recognize myself, she murmured. Good, Madame Rousseau said briskly. That girl in gray, she is dead. This woman, she is being born. Now stand still while I pin the bodice. By the time Madame Rousseau left, Alara was exhausted and overwhelmed. She had ordered, or rather Madame Rousseau had ordered for her, a wardrobe that would have taken her 20 years to afford on a governess salary. The Duke found her sitting in the morning room, staring at fabric samples. Surviving? He asked. Barely. Your Madame Rousseau is terrifying. She's the best in London. You'll thank me when you see the results. He sat across from her. My aunt sent word. She'll arrive tomorrow afternoon. I should warn you, she's unconventional. How unconventional? She wears trousers when she rides. She smokes cigars. She once challenged a Russian count to a duel over a disputed hand of cards. The Duke smiled. She's going to adore you. Alara laughed despite herself. I think I might be terrified of your aunt. Everyone is. But she's also the kindest person I know and fiercely loyal. If she takes you under her wing, society will fall in line, eventually. And if she doesn't like me? She will. The Duke's certainty was unnerving. Now, about tonight. I've invited Lord and Lady Ashford, they're old friends, very discreet, and Sir James Meredith, who knew your father's regiment. Nothing formal, just dinner and conversation. You're easing me in gently. I'm getting you a chance to practice before throwing you to the wolves. He stood. Rest this afternoon. Tonight will be more taxing than you think. Alara spent the afternoon in her room, trying to read but unable to focus. Her mind kept returning to the impossibility of her situation. Yesterday, she was a governess. Today, she was a duke's ward. Tomorrow, she would meet a duchess who wore trousers and challenged counts to duels. It was absurd. It was terrifying. It was the most alive she'd felt in years. At 7, Annie came to help her dress. Madame Rousseau had left behind one completed gown, a simple but elegant dress in deep green that made Alara's auburn hair look like burnished copper. Annie dressed her hair in a style that was fashionable but not too ambitious, and presented her with a pair of pearl earrings. From His Grace, Annie said. He said they were his mother's, and she would have wanted you to have them. Alara's hands trembled as she put them on. They were beautiful, simple, elegant, perfect, and they had belonged to the Duke's mother. What am I doing? She went downstairs with her heart hammering and found the Duke waiting in the drawing room with his guests. Lord Ashford was a cheerful man in his 50s. His wife was elegant and kind-eyed. Sir James was elderly, with a military bearing and a gentle smile. Miss Ashmont, the Duke said, and his eyes widened slightly when he saw her. You look lovely. The dress is Madame Rousseau's doing? The dress is just fabric. You make it lovely.
He turned to his guests. May I present Miss Alara Ashmont? Miss Ashmont, Lord and Lady Ashford, and Sir James Meredith. Sir James took her hand and bowed over it. Richard Ashmont's daughter. I can see the resemblance. He was a fine man, your father, brave as they come. Alara's throat tightened. Thank you, sir. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. The Ashfords were warm and welcoming, asking about her interests without prying into her years as a governess. Sir James told stories about her father that made her laugh and cry at the same time. And the Duke watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Satisfaction, perhaps, or something more complicated. After dinner, Lady Ashford took Alara aside in the drawing room while the men discussed politics. My dear, she said quietly, I know you must be overwhelmed, but I want you to know that what His Grace is doing for you is remarkable. He's a good man, despite his reputation for being cold. His reputation? People say he's heartless, that he feels nothing. It's nonsense, of course. He feels everything. He's just learned to hide it. Lady Ashford smiled. He'll deny it, but he's been searching for you for years. When he finally found you, he was like a man possessed. I've never seen him so determined. Why would he care so much? Because he spent his whole life trying to be worthy of the second chance your father gave him. Lady Ashford patted her hand. Don't question it, dear. Just accept it. And know that you have friends here. Later, after the guests had left, the Duke walked Elara back to the stairs. You did well tonight, he said. They were kind. They were honest. You charmed them. He paused at the base of the staircase. Get some rest. Tomorrow you meet Aunt Constance. You'll need your strength. Elara looked up at him, this strange, complicated man who had turned her life upside down in the span of a day.
Your Grace, she said impulsively, why did you really search for me? The truth. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because when your father died, he was smiling. Even with the bayonet through his chest, he was smiling. And do you know what he said? Elara shook her head, unable to speak. He said, tell my girl I was brave. Those were his last words. Not a cry for help, not a prayer, just that. Tell my girl I was brave. The Duke's eyes were dark with memory. I spent 3 years trying to find his girl so I could deliver that message. And when I finally found you, working yourself to exhaustion just to survive, I knew the message wasn't enough. I had to give you more. I had to give you the life he wanted you to have. Elara's vision blurred. He did say that? On my honor. The Duke's voice was rough. So yes, Miss Ashmont, I searched for you, and I will continue to help you, because your father's last act in this world was to save my life. And think of you. The least I can do is make sure his daughter knows she was loved. Elara couldn't stop the tears. They spilled down her cheeks, hot and unchecked. And she didn't care. The Duke produced a handkerchief. I didn't mean to make you cry. These are good tears, she managed. Thank you for telling me, for everything. He bowed slightly. Sleep well, Miss Ashmont. Tomorrow is a new adventure. She went upstairs with her father's last words echoing in her heart. Tell my girl I was brave. And for the first time in years, she felt like someone's daughter again.
Don't worry, the Duke said from behind her. She only wears trousers when she's feeling particularly rebellious. It's actually a good sign. The Duchess swept into the house like a force of nature, trailing a long-suffering lady's maid and a cloud of expensive perfume. "Alexander!" she boomed, kissing the Duke on both cheeks. "Stop hiding in this mausoleum and show me this girl you've been fussing about." "Alexander, may I present Miss Elara Ashmont? Miss Ashmont, my aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Blackmore." Elara curtsied. "Your Grace, I'm honored." "None of that Your Grace nonsense. Call me Constance, or Duchess if you must be formal, but not Your Grace. It makes me feel like a cathedral." The Duchess circled Elara like a general inspecting troops.
Good posture now. Alexander mentioned you dislouching. Pretty eyes, intelligent forehead. Could use some meat on your bones, but Rousseau's dresses will help with that. Yes, you'll do. I thank you? Don't thank me yet, child. I'm about to make your life very difficult. The Duchess turned to the Duke. Alexander, leave us. This is women's business. I'll be in study if you need me, the Duke said, and fled. The Duchess settled into a chair and gestured for Ilara to sit. Now, let's have the truth. Alexander says you were a governess. How bad was it? Ilara blinked. I beg your pardon? The bad parts, the humiliation, the cruelty. Don't spare my delicate sensibilities. I don't have any. The Duchess's eyes were sharp but kind. I need to know what we're working with. So Ilara told her about the workhouse after her mother died, about the years of scraping together enough education to qualify as a governess, about the Pembertons and their casual cruelty, about the invitation that was meant to humiliate her. The Duchess listened without interrupting, her face growing progressively darker. Pembertons, she said finally, I know them. Jumped-up merchants pretending to be gentry.
The woman's a viper and the man's a fool. She smiled, and it was not a nice smile. Well, ruin them, of course. What? No, I don't want... Not ruin, just ruin their social ambitions. It's quite different. The Duchess waved a hand. But that's later. First, we make you into someone they can't touch, someone they have to respect whether they like it or not. I'm not sure that's possible. Everything is possible with enough audacity and the right wardrobe. The Duchess leaned forward. Now, Alexander tells me he wants to restore your position in society. Is that what you want? The question caught Ilara off guard. I don't know. I haven't had time to think about what I want. This all happened so fast. Understandable. So let me ask it differently. If you could have anything, any life at all, with no constraints, what would it be? Ilara thought about it, really thought about it. I'd want to be independent, she said slowly, not beholden to anyone. I'd want my own home. Not a grand estate, just something that's mine. I'd want to read what I like, think what I like, speak my mind without worrying I'll lose my position. I'd want freedom. The Duchess smiled. Good answer. Here's the problem. Society doesn't give women freedom. It gives them marriage or spinsterhood and pity. But, she raised a finger, if you're clever, you can carve out a third path, a respectable independence. It requires money, which Alexander is providing. It requires connections, which I will provide. And it requires you to be absolutely irreproachable in public, while privately doing whatever the hell you want. Ilara laughed despite herself. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's work. But it's possible. The Duchess sat back. Here's what I propose. We spend the next 6 months preparing you. Rousseau makes you elegant. I teach you how to navigate society. Alexander provides the financial backing.
And at the end of it, you'll have the choice. Marry if you find someone tolerable, or live independently as a woman of means. Your decision, your life. And if I fail? You won't. I don't invest in failures. The Duchess's eyes glinted. Besides, I've seen your kind before. Girls who've survived hell and come out with their spines intact. You're not going to fail. You're going to thrive. You're just too scared to believe it yet. Ilara felt something loosen in her chest. Hope, maybe, or just the possibility of hope. When do we start? Tomorrow. Today, you rest. Tonight, we have a quiet dinner, just family, so you can stop being terrified. The Duchess rose. Alexander tells me you like to read. What subjects? History, poetry, natural philosophy. Anything I can get my hands on, really. Good. I'll send some books to your room. Consider it your real education, the one they don't teach governesses. She paused at the door. And Ilara, you can trust Alexander. I know it seems too good to be true. I know men in general are not to be trusted. But my nephew is one of the rare exceptions. He means every word he says. Why is he doing this? Really? The Duchess looked at her for a long moment. Because when you've been saved, you spend the rest of your life looking for ways to deserve it. Your father saved him. Now he's trying to save you. Whether either of you needs saving is irrelevant. He needs to try. She left, and Ilara sat alone in the morning room, staring at her hands. Your father saved him. Now he's trying to save you. But what if she didn't need saving? What if she just needed a chance? The next 6 weeks blurred together in a whirlwind activity. Madame Rousseau arrived twice weekly with new creations.
Alara acquired a wardrobe that would have stunned her 6-week-ago self. Morning dresses in soft blues and greens, afternoon dresses in elegant grays and roses, evening gowns in silk and satin that made her look like someone who belonged in ballrooms. The Duchess came every afternoon to teach what she called the art of social warfare. Rule 1, she said, never apologize for existing. You have as much right to be here as anyone. Rule 2, smile when they insult you. It confuses them and makes you look confident. Rule 3, always know more than you reveal. Let them underestimate you, then eviscerate them with politeness. They practiced conversations. The Duchess would play the role of various society dragons, and Alara would have to navigate the verbal traps. Miss Ashmont, I hear you were a governess. How quaint. I found teaching quite rewarding, Lady Hartwell, though I must say one does meet a more interesting class of people in a duke's household than in a schoolroom. The Duchess cackled. Good, implies she's boring without saying it directly. Again. The Duke watched these lessons from the doorway sometimes, his expression caught between amusement and something softer. At night, they dined together, the Duke, the Duchess, and Alara. The Duchess told outrageous stories about her youth. The Duke was quieter, but his rare smiles were worth working for. And slowly, carefully, Alara began to unfold. She discovered she had opinions on politics, on philosophy, on art and music, and the proper role of government. The Duke encouraged her to argue with him, and she found she enjoyed it. The thrust and parry of ideas, the way his eyes lit up when she made a particularly good point. You should have been a barrister, he said one night after she demolished his position on factory reform. Women can't be barristers. More's the pity, you'd terrify the judges. The Duchess threw dinner rolls at both of them and declared them tedious.
But beneath the pleasant routine, Alara felt something shifting. The Duke was kind, respectful, generous. He never overstepped, never presumed. But sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. And sometimes, God help her, she found herself watching him back. It was dangerous, stupid. He was a duke, and she was, what? His charity case? His ward? His penance project? She couldn't afford to confuse gratitude with anything else. So she buried the warmth she felt when he smiled at her. She ignored the way her heart jumped when he entered a room. She reminded herself, firmly and often, that this was temporary, that she was being prepared for an independent life, not a fairy tale. But then came the night of the Duchess's card party. It was meant to be a small gathering, a dozen carefully selected ladies of varying ages and ranks, all vetted by the Duchess as not complete vipers. Alara wore a new gown in deep burgundy with the pearl earrings the Duke had given her. The Duchess pronounced her acceptably elegant and shoved her into the drawing room. The ladies were polite, curious. Some were genuinely kind. Others were assessing her like a horse at market. Bloodlines, prospects, threat level. Lady Morrison, a viscountess with a reputation for cruelty, smiled sweetly. Miss Ashmont, you must tell us about your family. Ashmont Hall in Derbyshire, such a lovely estate. Do you visit often? It was a trap. Everyone here knew the estate had been sold. Alara smiled. Sadly, no. My father's death left us in unfortunate circumstances, and the estate was sold to settle debts. But I have fond memories of childhood there. Do you know Derbyshire, Lady Morrison? Oh, only slightly. I'm more familiar with larger estates, grander holdings. How fortunate for you. Alara's smile didn't waver. I've always thought happiness mattered more than grandeur, but I'm sure your grand holdings bring you great joy.
Lady Morrison's smile tightened. The Duchess, playing whist across the room, made a noise that might have been a laugh. The evening progressed. Alara held her own. She was polite without being obsequious, charming without being false. By the time the last lady left, even Lady Morrison had unbent enough to invite her to a musicale.
"You did brilliantly," the Duchess said, pouring them both brandy in defiance of propriety. "Morrison tried to gut you 3 times, and you turned it back on her every time. I'm proud." "I was terrified." "Of course you were, but you didn't show it, which is what matters." The Duchess raised her glass. "To your first victory." They drank, and Alara felt something like triumph. But the triumph was short-lived. 2 days later, she received a letter. It was unsigned, but the handwriting was feminine and educated. "Miss Ashmont, you may think you found a patron in the Duke of Thornwood, but you should know the truth about His Grace's generosity. 3 years ago, he was betrothed to Lady Charlotte Pemberton, yes, the sister of your former employer. The engagement was broken when Lady Charlotte eloped with another man, humiliating the Duke publicly. He has never forgiven the Pemberton family. You are not his ward. You are his revenge. He is using you to humiliate the Pembertons, and when he's finished, you'll be discarded. Do not trust him. Do not believe his kindness. You are a pawn in a game you don't understand." Alara read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking. It made a horrible kind of sense. The Duke's fierce protection, his generosity towards someone he barely knew, his anger when he'd learned she was employed by the Pembertons. You are his revenge. She thought she might be sick. The Duke found her in the library an hour later, still holding the letter. "Miss Ashmont, what's wrong?" She handed him the letter without a word. He read it, and his face went carefully blank. "Who sent this? It's not signed."
"I can guess." He set the letter down. "It's lies." "Is it?" Alara's voice was steadier than she felt. "Were you engaged to Charlotte Pemberton?" A pause. "Yes." "And she humiliated you. She eloped with a music teacher. It was unpleasant. And you never thought to mention this?" Alara stood, anger flooding through her. "You never thought I should know that you have a personal vendetta against the family that employed me?" "It's not a vendetta." "Then what is it?" She was shaking now, fury and hurt and betrayal tangling together. "Why did you really take me in? To hurt them? To show Charlotte what she lost? Was any of it real? Or am I just a convenient tool for your revenge?" "Stop." The Duke's voice was sharp. "You're not a tool. You're not revenge. Yes, I hate the Pembertons. Yes, I'm glad to take something precious, you, out of their grasp. But that's not why I searched for you. That's not why I brought you here." "Then why?" "Because your father saved my life," the Duke's composure cracked. "Because I owe him a debt that can never be repaid. Because when I found you in that house, being treated like dirt by people who aren't fit to speak your name, I was furious. Yes, I enjoyed taking you away from them. But I would have done the same if you'd been employed by saints. You deserved better. You still do." "How do I know that's true?" "Because I'm telling you." He stepped closer, his eyes burning. "I'm not a liar, Miss Ashmont. I'm many things, arrogant, cold, vindictive when crossed, but I'm not a liar. If this was about revenge, I'd have flaunted you at every social event, paraded you in front of the Pembertons, made a spectacle. Instead, I've been preparing you for independence, for a life that has nothing to do with me or them or anyone else. Does that sound like revenge?" Alara wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. "I need time," she said, "to think."
The Duke's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Take all the time you need. But, Alara," he paused, "that letter was meant to poison you against me. Don't let whoever sent it win." He left, and Alara sank into a chair, the letter crumpled in her hand. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Part 4. Alara spent 3 days avoiding the Duke. It wasn't difficult. He gave her space, retreating to his study or his club, leaving her to the Duchess's continued lessons and Madame Rousseau's final fittings. But the Duchess noticed. "All right," she said on the 3rd day, setting down her teacup with a sharp click. "What happened between you and Alexander?" Alara had been expecting this. "I received a letter." "What kind of letter?" She handed it over. The Duchess read it, and her face darkened. "Charlotte Pemberton," she said flatly.
That vindictive little snake. Yes, Alexander was engaged to her. Yes, she humiliated him. No, this letter is not true. He's not using you for revenge. How can you be sure? Because I know my nephew. The Duchess set the letter down. Alexander doesn't do subtle revenge. If he wanted to hurt the Pembertons, he'd destroy them financially, socially, completely. He has the power and the connections to do it. Instead, he's done nothing except take you out of their house. Does that sound like revenge? But why didn't he tell me? Because he's a fool about emotions. The Duchess sighed. Alexander has spent most of his adult life being betrayed by people he trusted. His father was a drunk who gambled away half the estate. His mother died when he was young. Charlotte broke his engagement publicly. He's learned to be guarded. So when he found you, someone he could actually help, someone deserving, he didn't want to complicate it with his own messy history. That's not fair to me. You're absolutely right. It's not. And if you're angry with him, you have every right to be. The Duchess leaned forward.
But don't throw away everything he's offering because of Charlotte Pemberton's spite. That woman has already taken enough from him. Don't let her take you too. Ilara stared at her hands. I don't know what's real anymore. His kindness, his generosity, is it genuine or is it guilt, obligation? I feel like I'm standing on sand. Then let me give you something solid. The Duchess's voice was firm. I've known Alexander since he was born. I've seen him at his best and his worst. And I've never seen him care about someone the way he cares about you. It terrifies him, which is why he's hiding in his study instead of fighting for you. But it's real. Ilara's heart lurched. Cares about me? Duchess, I'm his ward. You're not his ward. You never were. You're the woman who walked into his ballroom knowing she'd be humiliated and did it anyway. You're the woman who survived hell and came out with her dignity intact. You're the woman who argues with him about politics and makes him laugh and reminds him that there's more to life than brooding in empty houses. The Duchess smiled. And yes, you're Richard Ashmont's daughter, but that's not why he can't stop thinking about you. Ilara couldn't breathe. You're wrong. I'm 72 years old and I've been wrong twice in my life. This isn't one of those times. The Duchess stood. Now, you have a decision to make. You can believe Charlotte's poison and leave. Alexander will still provide for you because he's honorable to a fault. Or you can stay and see where this leads. Your choice, but make it based on what you want, not on fear. She laughed, and Ilara sat alone with her tangled thoughts. The woman who makes him laugh. Was that true? Did the Duke care about her as more than an obligation? And if he did, what did she feel? She thought about the way her heart jumped when he entered her room, the way she looked forward to their nightly debates, the way his rare smiles felt like sunshine after rain.
The way she felt safe in his presence, even when they were arguing. Oh, God. She was falling in love with him. It was the stupidest, most dangerous thing she could possibly do. He was a duke. She was nobody. This was temporary, a charity project that would end when she was established in society. There was no future here. But her heart didn't care about logic. And maybe, just maybe, the Duchess was right. That evening, Ilara went to the Duke's study and knocked. Come in. He was at his desk, surrounded by papers, and he looked exhausted. When he saw her, he stood immediately. Miss Ashmont. Can we talk? Of course. He gestured to the chairs by the fire, and they sat facing each other, the flames casting shadows across his face. Ilara took a breath. I'm sorry for doubting you, for believing the letter. You had every right to doubt me. I should have told you about Charlotte. Yes, you should have, but I understand why you didn't. She met his eyes. The Duchess said you're afraid of being betrayed again. His jaw tightened. My aunt talks too much. She cares about you. So do I. The words came out before she could stop them. You've given me so much. A future, hope, kindness, when I desperately needed it. I don't want to repay that by running away the first time someone tries to poison me against you." The Duke was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I need to tell you something. The truth. All of it. All right. When I found you," he began slowly, "when I finally tracked you down to the Pembertons after 3 years of searching, I was prepared to offer you money and walk away. That was the plan. Discharge my debt, ensure you were taken care of, move on with my life." Ilara's heart sank. So it was just obligation after all. "But then I watched you," he continued. "For 2 weeks before the banquet, I had someone observe the household, and I learned that you woke at 5 every morning to prepare lessons.
That you ate your meals in the servants' hall because Lady Pemberton wouldn't let you join the family. That you mended your own clothes and bought books with the few pennies you could save, and never complained, never broke, never gave up." His voice roughened, and I was furious and ashamed. Because you were living like that while I was spending my days brooding about Charlotte and feeling sorry for myself. You don't owe me. Let me finish. He leaned forward. I sent the invitation thinking I'd meet you, offer you help, and that would be the end of it. But when I saw you walk through those doors, knowing you'd be mocked, knowing you'd be hurt, and doing it anyway because you're too brave and too stubborn to back down, I knew I couldn't just hand you money and leave. I wanted to give you everything. Your life back, your pride, your future. And yes, part of me enjoyed taking you away from the Pembertons, but that wasn't why I did it. Then why? His eyes held hers. Because you deserve it. Because your father saved my life, and the only way I can repay that is by making sure his daughter has the life she should have had. And because... He stopped. Because what? Because from the moment you looked at me in that ballroom, terrified but defiant, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. The words came out rough, almost angry. I tell myself it's obligation, it's debt, but I'm lying. The truth is I care about you in ways that have nothing to do with your father, and that terrifies me. Because everyone I've ever cared about has left. My mother died. My father drank himself to death. Charlotte betrayed me. I don't know how to do this. How to care without losing. Aileraz's breath caught. You're not going to lose me. You don't know that. Neither do you. She stood, and he stood with her, and suddenly they were close enough that she could see the vulnerability in his eyes. You, Grace. Alexander. I'm scared too. I've spent years learning not to need anyone.
Not to hope for anything beyond survival. And then you appeared and gave me everything I thought I'd lost. It's overwhelming. And yes, sometimes I doubt it. But I don't doubt you. Not anymore. You should, he said roughly. I'm not good at this. I'm cold and difficult and... She kissed him. It was impulsive and probably unforgivably forward, but she'd spent years being proper, and where had it gotten her? She stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his, and for one heart-stopping moment, he froze. Then his arms came around her, and he kissed her back. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate and hungry, and full of everything they'd both been holding back. His hand tangled in her hair, scattering pins. Her fingers clutched his jacket. The world narrowed to this, his mouth on hers, his heartbeat against her palm, the way he held her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. This is a terrible idea, he murmured. Probably. You're supposed to be preparing for independence, not getting tangled up with a duke who doesn't know how to... She kissed him again, softer this time. Stop talking. He laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. We need to discuss this, he said when they came up for air. Properly. What this means. What you want. A knock at the door made them spring apart.
The Duchess swept in without waiting for an answer, took one look at them, Alara's disheveled hair, the Duke's rumpled cravat, their guilty expressions, and smiled. "Finally," she said. "I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you in a closet together. Now, Alexander, stop looking like you've been caught robbing the silver. Alara, fix your hair, and both of you come have dinner. We have a wedding to plan. Aunt Constance, don't Aunt Constance me."
You're clearly mad about each other. You're both old enough to know your own minds, and I'm too old to waste time on propriety. Propose properly, boy. She deserves romance, not you brooding in your study for another 6 months. The Duke looked at Alara, his eyes full of question. And Alara, who had spent years learning to be careful and sensible and afraid, decided to be brave instead. "She's right," Alara said softly, "though I'd prefer you ask when your aunt isn't watching." The Duchess cackled. "I'll give you 5 minutes, but make it good, Alexander. The girl deserves poetry." She swept out, and the Duke turned back to Alara. "I'm not good at poetry," he said. "I don't need poetry. I need honesty." He took her hands. "Alara Ashmont, I've spent 3 years searching for you and 6 weeks trying not to fall in love with you, and I failed at the latter as completely as I succeeded at the former. You're brave and brilliant and stubborn and everything I didn't know I needed. I can offer you wealth, position, my name, but those are just things. What I really want to offer is this, a partnership, a life where you don't have to be grateful or careful or afraid, where you can be exactly who you are, and that will always be enough. Will you marry me?" It wasn't poetry. It was better. "Yes," Alara said. "Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her again, and this time when the Duchess burst back in, she was carrying champagne. Part 5. The engagement was announced a week later, and society erupted. Some said it was romantic, a duke marrying a woman he'd saved, honoring his debt to her heroic father. Others said it was scandalous, a duke marrying so far beneath him, taking a penniless governess to wife. Lady Pemberton, according to reports, took to her bed for 3 days. Charlotte Pemberton sent a letter that the Duke burned without reading. And Alara, who had spent years invisible and insignificant, found herself at the center of London's gossip machine. The Duchess was delighted. "Controversy is excellent," she declared. "It means you're interesting. Boring people are forgotten. You, my dear, will never be forgotten." The Duke, less delighted by the gossip, wanted to move the wedding to his country estate, away from prying eyes. Alara refused. "We're not hiding," she said firmly. "We're not ashamed. We'll marry here, in London, in front of everyone. Let them talk." So they did. The wedding was held at St. George's, Hanover Square, on a bright morning in late spring. The church was packed, half with genuine well-wishers, half with people who came to see if the governess would embarrass herself. Alara walked down the aisle in a gown of ivory silk, designed by Madame Rousseau, with seed pearls and Belgian lace. Her auburn hair was dressed with orange blossoms. She wore the pearl earrings the Duke had given her and carried a bouquet of white roses. She looked like a duchess. More importantly, she felt like herself. The Duke waited at the altar in formal dress, his face grave until he saw her. Then he smiled, that rare, genuine smile, and Alara's heart turned over in her chest. The ceremony was beautiful, traditional. The vows were spoken clearly, witnessed by a church full of nobility and a few carefully invited reporters who would spread the story across London. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the Duke kissed her in front of God and society, and Alara heard someone in the back pews whisper, "Well, he really does love her." Yes, she thought, he really does. The wedding breakfast was held at Thornwood House, and Alara navigated it with the grace the Duchess had taught her. She smiled at Lady Morrison. She charmed the elderly lords. She fielded intrusive questions with polite deflection. And when Lady Pemberton finally appeared, looking sour and magnificent in purple silk, Alara met her eyes and smiled. "Lady Pemberton, how kind of you to come." "I wouldn't have missed it," Lady Pemberton said tightly. "Though I must say I'm surprised. When you were teaching my children, I never imagined you'd aspire so high."
Neither did I, Ilara said honestly. But then, life is full of surprises. Thank you for employing me, by the way. The experience was educational. The Duke appeared at her elbow. Lady Pemberton, lovely to see you, though I believe your carriage is waiting. It was a dismissal, polite but firm. Lady Pemberton's face went red. She curtsied stiffly and left, and Ilara felt the Duke's hand warm at her waist. You didn't need my help, he murmured. I know, but I liked it anyway. That evening, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, the Duke found Ilara in the garden. She'd escaped the congratulations and the champagne to stand among the roses, breathing the cool evening air. Hiding from your own wedding? He asked, coming to stand beside her. Hiding from 300 people asking when we're going to have children, she smiled. I needed a moment of quiet. You were magnificent today. I was terrified. You didn't show it. He took her hand. You never do. They stood together in the gathering dusk, and Ilara thought about the impossible distance she'd traveled, from the servants' entrance to the Duke's garden, from governess to duchess, from invisible to seen. Do you ever wonder if it's all a dream? She asked quietly. Every day. He turned to face her. But then you argue with me about factory reform or throw books at my head when I'm being insufferable, and I remember it's real. You're real. This is real. I threw one book, once. It was a very large book. I have the bruise to prove it. She laughed, and he pulled her close, and they stood wrapped in each other while the stars came out overhead.
My father would have liked you, Ilara said softly. I hope so. I owe him everything. No. She pulled back to look at him. You don't owe him. You honored him. There's a difference. You gave me back my life, not because of debt, but because you're a good man who does the right thing, even when it's difficult. His eyes were suspiciously bright. You're going to make me cry on my wedding day. Duchesses can't cry, the Duchess told me. It ruins our mystique. You are not that kind of Duchess. No, Ilara agreed. I'm the kind who used to be a governess and isn't ashamed of it. I'm the kind who argues with her husband and throws books when necessary. I'm the kind who remembers what it's like to be invisible and who will never, ever let anyone make another woman feel that way. The Duke kissed her forehead. That's exactly the kind of Duchess I wanted. Months later, in the autumn, Ilara attended her first ball as the Duchess of Thornwood. She wore emerald silk and diamonds, her auburn hair dressed high. She entered the ballroom on her husband's arm, and the crowd parted for her, not because she was a curiosity now, but because she was a duchess. A duchess who had once been a governess. A duchess who remembered. Across the ballroom, a young woman stood near the wall. She was plainly dressed, clearly a companion or governess, trying to be invisible. Ilara crossed the room. Good evening, she said gently. You look like you could use some champagne. The woman's eyes widened. Your Grace, I couldn't possibly. You can, and you will. Come. Ilara took her arm and led her to the refreshment table, ignoring the scandalized whispers. What's your name? Catherine, Your Grace, Catherine Moore. I'm companion to Lady Ashford's aunt. Well, Catherine, let me tell you something. This ballroom might seem overwhelming, but you belong here just as much as anyone else. Don't let them make you invisible. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Your Grace.
Call me Ilara, and if you ever need anything, a reference, a position, a friend, you come to me. Understood? Yes, Yes, Ilara. The Duke found her later, smiling. Making allies? Making sure no one else has to walk through the servants' entrance. She took his arm. Dance with me? Always. They swept onto the floor, and Ilara looked around at the glittering ballroom, at the people who had once mocked her, who now curtsied when she passed. At Lady Pemberton, watching from the corner with barely concealed fury. At the Duchess, resplendent in purple, winking at her across the crowd. And at her husband, who looked at her like she was the only person in the room. She had been the orphan governess. Now she was the Duchess of Thornwood. But more than that, she was Ilara, brave, stubborn, free. And that, she thought as the Duke spun her through a waltz, was worth more than any title. The music swelled, and Alara smiled. Her father would have been proud.